When we started planning this, Féile, one of the things we decided for the discussions and debates was that we were going to have at least one event each day on the issue of, on the discussion about a united Ireland. Now, already 2 years ago, in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, we noticed that that debate was happening spontaneously in a lot of the discussions that we were having. And by last year, I don't know if everybody quite agrees with me, but I got the feeling that there was a really interesting thing that had developed in our discussions last year on the issue, which was everybody was saying a united Ireland is coming. And that included loyalists and unionists who were at our events, right? And I think that the only thing that people differed on in the discussions was, well, two things. Number one, when? And number two, do I like that or not? But there was a sort of baseline that, you know, this is on the cards. So that prompted us to organise this event here today, and indeed other events on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., where we're sort of saying, look, let's take it as given. Let's say, for worse or for worser, Brexit happens, and that we have a united Ireland, or we're on that course for a united Ireland. What are the consequences of that? The real practical consequences, for example, in terms of health, where we're having a discussion. For example, in terms of constitutional law, where we're having the PJ McGrory lecture on that topic. Okay? Today, we're specifically focusing in on the question of economics. What are the economics of a united Ireland? What are the benefits and what are the possible disadvantages of a united Ireland for both parts of this island when we get to that point? So that's the sort of brief that the speakers have today. The speakers are from your left, Paul Gosling, Martina Devlin, Ursula Barry and Pearse Doherty, and we're going to get them to speak in that order, about 15 minutes each. I'll sort of try to be brutal if they go beyond that, and then we will have it open to a Q&A afterwards. Okay, so folks, welcome to the panel, please.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Great. Wonderful to see so many people. This is how politics should be. And congratulations to the organisers again. It's interesting there's so many more people than the event I did last year, which I think shows what is happening in terms of the debate. I'm not these days a member of any political party, or at least none that represents itself in terms of politics in Northern Ireland. And so I feel that I've got a freedom to upset every political party, so I will attempt to do that. And the first thing to do in terms of upsetting people is to say, let's just calm down a bit. I really think that calling for a border poll as if we want a border poll tomorrow and there'll be a united Ireland the day after is not politically sensible. So let's just say we're going to get there. It's a matter of how we get there, to make sure we've got a proper plan for getting there, and we've got a programme for making it successful. What is uncertain is whether we can make a proper success of it. Therefore, we have to plan, we have to programme, and we have to be careful, and we have to not shoot the horses or upset the horses. In terms of upsetting people, I'll say something else, which is, on the way in here, I was listening to RTE coming into the car park. My old friend Phil Kelly is in the audience, and he and I did a debate with People Before Profit just before the Brexit vote, and I heard Eamon McCann on RTE Radio 1 on the way in. He said, no one expected this level of Tory chaos as a result of Brexit. Well, actually, I've got news. I've got a better memory than Eamon had, because Phil and I told them very clearly, actually, this was the stuff that was going to happen out of Brexit. But that's not the only reason why we should go for the United Ireland. The southern economy is a damn sight better, it is stronger than the northern one. It has the economic fundamentals in place, and the northern one does not. We've got a powerhouse down in Dublin, and actually we can get a spin-off economic benefit out of that through a united Ireland. You look at the reason why businesses are locating in Dublin, and look at the reasons, particularly where I come from in the northwest, about why they're not locating in the northwest. And actually, even the local entrepreneurs that set up businesses, quite often they move their businesses out because they can't get the skills and they can't deal with the infrastructure, which just does not work very well. But clearly, protecting our economy and our welfare from the impact of Brexit is an important reason why the United Ireland is really very attractive indeed. In terms of the economy, wages are much higher in the south than they are in the north, which is another one of the things which is very attractive. But equally, we've got things that work in the south that don't work so well in the north. For example, InvestNI is not as good as the IDA in the south. We all know there are concerns about the IDA, but actually it is a better organisation than Invest Northern Ireland. And we have real problems about skills and infrastructure in Northern Ireland. The productivity in Northern Ireland is, well, Northern Ireland and Wales have the lowest productivity of any region in the UK. The northwest of Northern Ireland has by far the lowest productivity of anywhere in the UK. We have real problems, and it's no surprise we've got low productivity, and low productivity after all leads to low wages, and also we've got a problem about over-dependence in the public sector, but low productivity leads into low wages, and we just can't get goods to market, we can't commute easily to work, even the hospitals are disadvantaged by the fact that it takes a lot longer to get ambulances to the right place. So infrastructure is a big problem, and it goes back really to an underinvestment over decades. But equally, we don't have the skill base that there is in the south. So there's a much higher level of investment into universities and also into vocational skill base in the south than there is in the north. In Northern Ireland, I've been involved for the last 15 years, out of the 20 years I've lived in Northern Ireland, arguing we need a higher education sector which is much larger than the one we have at the moment. As things stand, we lose about a third of our students to the rest of the UK or sometimes to the south, and we don't get half of those skills back. More than half the people that go away don't come back. And as a result, we don't have the skill base that will actually enable businesses to expand. And that is one of the reasons why even the local businesses that are established quite often either relocate or else have additional bases elsewhere. We need a larger higher education sector. And if that is not just me saying it, Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England, said one of the big problems that Northern Ireland has in terms of its economy is that we just don't have the right number of university students. That is not to say that I want to stop anyone from Northern Ireland who wants to go to university elsewhere from doing so. But if we had the proper size of university, which means basically an extra third of places, then we would attract people from elsewhere, many of whom would stay there. So that's one of the problems we've got. But at the same time, we need to recognise there are difficulties about a united Ireland. One of which is that, yes, we have higher wages in the south, but there's also higher costs. And quite clearly, Dublin is struggling with lots of infrastructure problems and inflation problems, and Dublin really has problems that can't be solved in the short term. And as a result of that, we've got a very high cost of living in Dublin. And the health service. Again, listening to Eamon McCann on the way in, he's saying he supports broadly, I think he's saying he supports broadly the principle of United Ireland, but he couldn't support it without the National Health Service for the whole of Ireland. And that is a view that is heard across many communities, including from areas that you don't expect to hear it from. I hear Republicans say to me, yes, I want a United Ireland, but there has to be a National Health Service for the whole of Ireland. And that is an absolute priority. And while we have the principles behind Care in the south, that is a slow programme. It will take at least 10 years, a 10-year programme, and it is behind schedule. So we have to deal with the fact that we need to have a free point of delivery healthcare available for all people in the whole of Ireland, and we are a long way from achieving that at the moment. And to be blunt, there's also problems within the Eurozone. The Eurozone economy is currently underperforming. It is at risk of recession. There are problems with some of the economic fundamentals of the Eurozone. So that adds to the difficulties, the stresses that the Irish government potentially faces with reunification. The Republic of Ireland still has a substantial debt burden. And then we come to the issue of the Northern Ireland subvention, which we do have to deal with. According to the Treasury, the subvention, in other words, the subsidy from UK taxpayers towards Northern Ireland, is around £10 billion a year. I've written that book, A New Ireland, and I quote in that an essay from Tom Healy from Nevin Economic Research Institute, where he says, well, actually, if you look at only at the costs of Northern Ireland, the subvention's really about 5 billion rather than 10 billion pounds a year. But 5 billion pounds a year is still a lot of money, and in my opinion, at this moment in time, and I'm sure Pearse will disagree with me, but I believe at this moment in time, the Irish government, the Irish state is not able to cover that in terms of its existing responsibilities and revenue costs commitments. It's interesting though, when we're talking about the subvention of £5 billion or £10 billion, it's interesting to compare that with the cost of membership of the European Union. That is in net terms around £8.6 billion. So as far as the UK government's concerned, it costs more for Northern Ireland to be part of the United Kingdom than it does for the UK to be part of the European Union. And if you bear in mind that the pressures for Brexit largely came out of English nationalism, that does mean that the political context within Great Britain is changing rapidly. And of course, most of the people in this room will have come across the opinion polling of Conservative Party members, which showed actually that for the majority of Conservative Party members, Brexit is more important than the retention of the unity of the United Kingdom, whether that is Scotland remaining within the United Kingdom or Northern Ireland. As far as the majority of Conservative Party members are concerned, Brexit is the most important thing facing them. So there will be pressures from within English nationalism, not only to question whether actually people within the UK want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, but also about the pressure on the Barnett formula. So the level of cost of Northern Ireland society, the tax burden, will actually shift because we can expect to receive less subsidy in the future. But I think it's worth mentioning before I finish a couple of items about why we've got a subvention and whether you include 5 billion or 10 billion. It's worth mentioning actually before I say that the reason why there is that difference between the 5 billion and 10 billion is the number of costs that actually are UK broad that are not Northern Ireland specific. So for example, the debt interest burden and the contribution to the armed forces. And that's how Tom came up with the figure for 5 billion rather than 10 billion. You still have to argue about whether Northern Ireland, if it rejoined United Ireland, whether it had an obligation to help meet the debt interest costs. But that's something that would have to be discussed and negotiated. But we're talking, in my terms, about a subvention of 5 billion. So why is it that Northern Ireland costs UK taxpayers around £5 billion a year? If people say, well, it's the burden of the troubles, well, actually, that's a very simplistic analysis. It's, for a start, it's the fact that in Northern Ireland we've got such a segregated society. I interviewed Naomi Long a few days ago, and she said that the figures that she was working for were that the segregation of Northern Ireland society, the duplication of services, for example, around schools as a result of that, costs somewhere between, I'll say this slowly, between £750 million a year and £1.5 billion a year. That is the burden we're paying for having a segregated society. And that is something that has to be resolved. In addition to which, we have pro rata about 50,000 extra public service workers in Northern Ireland compared with the Republic or compared with England. That cost comes out to about £1.7 billion a year. So you can see that if you dealt with those issues about segregation, the duplication of services, and the higher level of public sector dependency, then actually you could address that level of subvention and you could create something that's much more economically viable as a unit. But the problem is, you can't do it instantly. And of course the other thing is, we've got very low productivity, which means we've got insufficiently high tax base. But the problem is, you can't do these things instantly, which is why I say, let's not give the impression we're calling for a border poll immediately. And I met with a senior Sinn Féin advisor a few days ago, and he said, well, the party's position is not to call for an immediate border poll, it's to call for an immediate setting of a date of a border poll. I think there was confusion about the Sinn Féin position, about when the border poll should be held, and my view very strongly is that we need to plan, we need to have a clear programme. And I think, I'm afraid, it's a 10-year transition after the border poll. We need a plan before the border poll, and we need a programme where you gradually move from being part of the United Kingdom into having a united Ireland, and that needs to take place over a 10-year period, where you gradually phase out the subvention from the UK government, and you make the whole of Ireland self-sufficient through that gradual process. And that gives you the opportunity to fully implement care. It creates the opportunity to have an all-Ireland health service, free and appointed delivery. It gives you the opportunity to increase the investment into skills so that we have proper vocational training and we have a larger university sector, and it also enables us to have the proper investment into infrastructure to make Northern Ireland work, because my final word here is that there is a moral obligation by the United Kingdom to make Northern Ireland work, because it was on their watch that things went wrong. And I don't mean just about the Troubles. There was a lack of investment into infrastructure. There's been a lack of investment in skills. We've been buying off Northern Ireland society by having too big a public sector without dealing with the economic fundamentals. And that is basically what we need to do to create a programme for a transition where we have a successful, effective Northern Ireland society. And just my final word here, we have to persuade both Republicans and Unionists that it is to everyone's advantage to get Northern Ireland working effectively. From a Unionist point of view, they have to learn, they have to recognise that unless Northern Ireland subvention is reduced, then they will suffer, because the subvention will go, it will be reduced by the taxpayers within England. And from a Republican point of view, we have to persuade people in the South that a united Ireland is economically viable and will not create a tax burden that's unaffordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So, Paul stuck to the time, Martina. Pressure. Martina, Devlin.
Good morning, everyone. Brexit has shaken something loose. You could call it possibilities. I can see a sense of common purpose that hasn't been evident in this part of the world since the days of the United Irishmen and women, when Belfast was known for radical ideas about social justice and democracy, and it was denounced for that as a hotbed of sedition. So 200 and odd years pass, and it seemed as if there'd be another convergence of interests compelling enough to overcome differences, until along came Brexit. Sands are shifting. There's a recognition of mutual interests between both parts of the island and between unionists and nationalists. But some practical steps need to be taken. At this point, I have to direct you to that well-known philosopher, Winnie the Pooh, who said, "I always get to where I'm going by walking away from where I've been." And hands up, I wrote that line from Senator Ian Marshall. The Union is on borrowed time. But the chaos of Brexiting is a reminder of the need to lay groundwork for change. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. A case can be made for reunification on the basis of common interests. So, questions to ask people. Is the union working for you? Is it delivering jobs, opportunities, prosperity? If not, would there be better outcomes within a reimagined Ireland? Economic growth, jobs, access to higher education, those are all logical incentives. But the challenge is to present a case for mutual interests. An even bigger challenge is to ensure that there's sufficient funding to underpin a key transitional period. My view is that money can be found, but money should never be a reason not to do something if you believe in it strongly enough. And I would just remind you here today that during the financial collapse in Ireland, 64 billion euro was found to recapitalise the banks. Half of that was money down the drain because 2 of the banks were liquidated. Something else to remember is that during negotiations about this reimagined Ireland, we can learn from the past. So in 1921, during the treaty negotiations which led to independence for the 26 counties, one of the stipulations in the treaty was that the Free State would take on a share of Britain's national debt. So this was a burden that the fledgling state had to shoulder. And I'd argue that if independence is granted for the North, that it should be on a debt-free basis. That would be a very good starting point. Do any of you know the artist Rita Duffy? I think she's based in Belfast. Well, Rita Duffy cast an AK-47 in chocolate, and it went on display in London at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and was also shown here in Belfast. Now, in London, audiences all marvelled over the very sweet, strong smell of chocolate. In Belfast, people read the serial number and speculated about how she got her hands on it. You know this already, but Belfast and London are not aligned. But neither are Dublin and Belfast. And if that chocolate AK-47 went on display in Dublin or Galway or Cork, the audience's reaction would be closer to London than Belfast. That's the reality. There is a soft Irish vote for reunification, which leeches away when horrible ideas like higher taxes are raised. So here's the thing. We have to remember that even a soft Brexit has negative consequences for both parts of this island. Reunification, properly organised, strategized, and done on a long-term basis, could offset those consequences. So we need an agreed approach, some way of sharing Ireland that doesn't involve borders, an economic and social alliance that may lead to a united Ireland, if people want to use that term, or some other name for the relationship. Maybe a federal arrangement during a choreographed transition phase. Currently, we have a story of unfulfilled potential on both parts of this island, even allowing for the dynamic powerhouse that Paul has referenced. But it doesn't have to stay that way. So, there will be a cost to reunification. And I'm not someone who believes that pounds, shillings and pence or euro should be the only reason to do or not do something. But we have to be aware of the details so that people can make informed decisions. That's only fair. I'd suggest that an economic stimulus package should be put in place and the North's economy built up, so it's not a drain on any citizen's pocket. International assistance should be canvassed for advice initially. For example, Germany had its own reunification project. It was delivered successfully, and we should ask Germany for advice. We want money though as well, and for that we could look to the EU. I believe we wouldn't look in Britain. I think we could also look to our friends in America, and Britain would have an obligation to contribute, perhaps over a 20-year period. But however expensive, however much moaning there'd be, the compelling argument is there'd be an end in sight. We need to find alternatives. The North would need to further encourage a stronger culture of entrepreneurship. Business incentives should be fostered. You could have tax breaks for people investing in startups, for example. You could have mentoring systems. One Enterprise Ireland for the entire island could promote great things. The IDA's been mentioned. It could become a pan-Ireland entity, authorised to encourage multinationals to locate north of the border. And there'd be knock-on benefits. For example, Dublin is running out of office space. There's plenty in Belfast from what I can see. And you've no end to car parking. So, what I would say also about many US multinationals, they locate to the Republic because it's the only English-speaking state using the euro. But those multinationals are concerned about the costs in the Republic, and particularly in Dublin. Accommodation costs are a real concern. So I think that in a united Ireland, Belfast would be really well placed to benefit, not least because it does have infrastructure and resources. So what I want to say finally is that this can't be about binaries such as winning and losing, nor can we expect unionists to stop being unionists. That would require people to change their identity, and that's not fair. There has to be space made in this new Ireland, this reimagined Ireland, for Britishness. Consent matters much more than backing people into a corner or wearing people down. So, generosity of spirit must be shown. Something has to give. And, we shouldn't think in terms of no surrender. That's not a logo or a rallying cry that we want to embrace ourselves. We want to be generous. We must do this with the heart and the hand. So, generosity of spirit requires conversations about a new national anthem, about a new flag, about new amendments to the Irish Constitution, about guaranteed seats in the Seanad for unionists, and about a guaranteed seat at the cabinet table. So let's prove that we're inclusive. We may have to reimagine the 12th of July. It may be that there are conversations around making that an all-Ireland holiday. And I accept that these arrangements will be difficult for some. But the prize is an important one, and we need to work towards it. Finally, I paid a visit to Ursula during an open day, back when Mary McAleese was president. And do you know what I remember most about that magnificent building? Not the stately rooms or the wonderful portraits, or even the absolutely delicious afternoon tea we got with the miniature scones and so forth. What I remember best is her study, because I spotted on one of the shelves a wee orangeman soft toy complete with sash and bowler hat. And that to me was leadership. And it's what's needed now, that kind of generosity and understanding and appreciating that somebody else's symbolic icons don't topple your own. There's space for both. That's democracy. It's a work in progress, but let me tell you, it is a beautiful thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. I like the strategically placed music there when you were reaching a crescendo. Next Next we have Ursula.
Thanks very much, Bill, and you're all very welcome. It's great to see such interest in this kind of debate. So the question that I have put to myself in terms of my contribution to the debate was, what would happen if we applied a gender or a feminist lens to our thinking about an all-island economy or an all-island society? One that would be in the interest of women and men across the whole island. And my argument is that to shift our thinking towards applying a feminist perspective on the economy of society, the first and the most important thing to do is to place the care economy at its centre. What we do, when we do that, all the mainstream assumptions about economic activity and economic well-being would be challenged. As things stand, the care economy is not valued or is seriously and systematically undervalued on our island, and also in a global context. Economists such as Marilyn Waring, Kenneth Galbraith, Maria Mies, Silvia Federici have been producing a counter-narrative to the traditional model of development that has been imposed on us by mainstream economics for decades. Under this global system of measurement of GNP and GDP, what we are measuring is market-based economic activity that passes through the market and therefore carries a price. Nothing else is measured. And that is the way economic statistics are collected under a worldwide system, the UN system of national accounts. The EU and others have made some attempts to develop other measures of economic well-being, such as the UN Human Development Index and the Index of Gender Equality in the EU context. However, while these developments are important in contesting the mainstream framework, in practice they are still operating within a neoliberal economic model that holds worldwide dominance. And that neoliberal model means that a lot of things are simply not measured. The first thing that's not measured is subsistence agriculture. Any agriculture that is generates products for home consumption, or craft production, making clothing or anything like that, that is for household consumption. That's not measured because it doesn't go through the market. Any kind of household activity, care, domestic labour of all kinds, nothing is measured that is unpaid, that's happened in the household. Community activity, anything that's unpaid is not measured. And volunteering activity, anything that is not paid is unmeasured. So it's just not measured, not included, but rather it's excluded from the picture of economic and social activity in global contemporary economics. So in practice, our policy systems work at an extremely narrow definition of economic welfare and social well-being. In a way, value has been conflated to price. Price is the driving force within this kind of system. So what is this to do with applying a feminist lens to an all-Ireland economy? It has to do with understanding the implications for women who carry out the vast majority of those unpaid activities north and south of the border. It means that a very significant amount of what we do is hidden, invisible, and unmeasured in economic data. And it's hidden, invisible, and unmeasured when it comes to making economic and social policies that affect all our lives, such as pensions and social welfare entitlements, policies which are largely still linked to paid work, and that's how you build up eligibility. So what I'm talking about is that there is a highly significant care penalty that is borne primarily by women. It's experienced by women who miss out on contributory state pensions, on access to labour market schemes, and to a range of different social protection benefits that are linked to a person's employment history. As women move between employment, care, unemployment, underemployment, precarious employment, and more care, they build up insufficient paid work entitlements to many kinds of state supports. And experienced by women also who are blocked within promotional and career structures in far too many jobs in the public and private sector. Inequality of pay and inequality of earnings persists in both parts of our island economy. And it's important to emphasise that men also suffer from these rigid gender roles because of their disengagement from care and caring and the low priority that is attached to care within the policy system. So what would it look like if we applied a gender perspective and a women's standpoint to uniting this island economy? First of all, it would be recognising the need to dismantle the patriarchal economic structures and systems which shape both parts of our island. These patriarchal systems of power are common both north and south, and they account for the marginalisation of the care economy. And what, I would ask you, other than male-dominated system of economic thinking, could devise a system of recognition and valuing economic activity in such a way that excludes the work of most women across the globe, and that conveys a patriarchal dividend on men. And make no mistake, patriarchal systems of power convey substantial patriarchal benefits to men generally, although not all men and not all the time. As Marilyn Waring, the New Zealand feminist, put it strongly back in 1999, men won't easily give up a system in which half the world's population works for next to nothing. Precisely because that half works for so little, it may have no energy left to fight for anything else. Another key word, another key question of the patriarchal systems within our dominant economics is the link between patriarchal power systems and the question of gender-based violence. Because I fundamentally believe that the same patriarchal system of power and equality is responsible for the perpetuation of gender-based violence and a rape culture that is all too evident in causing widespread harm on this island. So, why am I talking this way in the context of uniting Ireland? Because I believe we need a radical process of social and economic change if we are to create real benefits for the majority of women and men in this society. On both parts of our island, economic and social inequalities are stark, inequality is deepening, and inequality has a gendered face. And when we add Brexit into the equation, things get more complicated and discriminatory. Isabella Schutz of the London School of Economics has written extensively on freedom of movement in an EU and Brexit context, and the conditions under which residency rights are required by EU migrants. Schutz highlights how unpaid work is not defined or categorised as work in the EU legislative framework, and as a result, residency rights have gendered consequences. In practice, all EU migrants are not equal when it comes to residency rights. Women involved in unpaid care work are not engaged in what EU case law deems to be genuine or effective work, which is in practice exclusive to those engaged in paid work. So unless a care person has a partner with EU residency rights or can show evidence that they are financially self-sufficient, they lose eligibility for residency rights. In the context of Brexit negotiations over the future, rights of EU nationals living in the UK, of whom Ireland is one of the largest group, free movement is a critical issue. And women whose rights are compromised or penalised because they're taking up unpaid care responsibilities are in a significantly more precarious position. As Schutz says, the status of care is not included among the categories of mobile EU citizens that have residency rights. But, on the contrary, if we put care really at the heart of our laws and policies, women could not be marginalised, the environment would be protected, and migrant workers would have a central place in our economic systems. Our economic, social and political priorities would be hugely different. As Nicola Yates, previously of Queen's, has highlighted, globalised care chains are evident across the international economy, in which care is increasingly commodified in a globalised system of exploitation, where women global migrants will replace women rural migrants in the contemporary care economy of the 20th and 21st century. So we now have a new globalised system of exploitation in which majority world countries provide the care labour that is underpaid and undervalued based on displaced families and vulnerable precarious workers migrating to the wealthier regions of the world economy, including Ireland. We are part of the global care chain. And we are at the buying end of the global care chain. Placing care at the centre of our understanding would mean environment, housing, health and education would be prioritised as sites for public investment. It would mean an end to systems that undermine the very notion of care by keeping individuals and families in systems of direct provision that are the very opposite of caring for those who are vulnerable. And the culture that tolerates and reproduces gender-based violence would have to be effectively challenged north and south. As sexual assault, rape and domestic violence are essentially a denial of care at the most fundamental of all levels. And because the flip side of care is harm and damage, and the different ways in which it manifests itself. And we need gender and equality proofing of all policies in United Ireland, based on inclusive, gender disaggregated and socially aware data that includes the homeless, travellers, undocumented, those in refuges and institutions, which are conveniently left out of most mainstream economic and social analysis. And we need to consider what's at stake. Women's right to pay, non-discrimination, maternity and parental leave, to protection at work during pregnancy, and breastfeeding mothers as part-time and temporary workers all derive from European law over the last few decades. And since the Framework Equality Directive in 2008, EU law has extended its protection against discrimination and protection the LGBTQI communities. We need to be extremely wary of a post-Brexit scenario in which gender injustice and economic inequality become more and more the norm, and racist hate crimes become more and more common. Data shows that there was a 25% increase in hate crimes in the year following the Brexit referendum in the UK. And as we saw in the recent economic crisis, gender inequality issues were sidelined. In the South, we saw the closure of the Combat Poverty Agency, the Women's Health Commission. We saw the closure of the Intercultural and Migration Commission. We saw the Equality Office lose a budget by 43%, and we saw the Crisis Pregnancy Agency close down. More equal women's representation is no guarantee that regular policies of social change and social justice will be implemented. But without it, care in its broadest and most complex sense will never be central to our economic and social systems. And reproductive justice and reproductive rights will remain elusive or compromised. As feminists and egalitarians on this island, we're engaged with profound gender and ethical questions, and questions concerning reproductive justice, care systems, equality, gender and social justice, economic, social and political rights for all, including migrants, public and corporate responsibilities, and environmental degradation. These are our core concerns, and they need to be forefronted always by an eco-feminist and gender-informed debate about the future of our island society, and the role of a properly financed basic income in creating greater economic justice. A system that begins to value unpaid care across this island. Thanks.
Running that out to the whole globe. So we thought it was a difficult question. Obviously, it's an even more difficult question. Pearse, Pearse Doherty.
I guess Caimar Echo will make into sense to be in Shaw, ik veel in Buffalo, Mel Park State, which in our Shaw play, because they were at a play more than a couple of years ago in here. I guess Caimar Plastic will gael and his small just practice Shaw Gaharia, suggested the cheer in the wool shot and the wool and our Shaw a play more as a Tesha. Away. Delighted to be here at Féile and Phobail. Delighted to see such a crowd. I expected to be coming in here. I was told it was very informal and I would only need to speak for 5 minutes, so I'll wing it. But I didn't expect to see such a crowd. But it just shows the importance of this debate in terms of Irish unity and the economics of Irish unity. And it's a debate, as we know here, that has been raging in the north. For many years, a debate now that and discussion that has been mentioned in the House of Commons by Tories, by indeed the former Prime Minister, a debate that has been discussed in different summer schools and all the rest. But it's not a debate that has really taken off in the South, and there's a particular reason for that. And I would really appeal to other political parties and different groups and organisations to catch on to the debate that's happening, because the issue of Irish unity is something, I would argue that the train has left the station here, and the only question is what time will it arrive? And there's an importance for us to discuss, to analyse, and to reflect on the opportunities, the possibilities, the challenges that Irish reunification poses. Paul talked about, I think, stay calm. Maybe there's a new motto, keep calm, think 32. But for Sinn Féin, we're very calm on this issue. We've been very measured, and probably we've had a long time position in relation to this issue, but also in relation to planning for Irish unity. It was the 3rd of November 2005, 14 years ago, when Sinn Féin tabled a motion in Leinster House in the Oireachtas asking for all the parties who subscribed to Irish unity, and particularly the government, the Fianna Fáil government at the time, to prepare and plan for Irish unification, to set out a green paper and open up an inclusive discussion in relation to what does Irish unity look like. How does all of the issues that have been addressed by our speakers here, in terms of the inequalities that exist north and south, in terms of the gender issues, but also in terms of the challenges of public service, how do they all address in the context of Irish unity? On the 3rd of November 2005, they told us that the time wasn't right. It was 2 years ago that myself and Gerry Adams met with all of the different party leaders and asked them to start to set up a committee on Irish unity and start to prepare for these challenges that lay ahead of us. And again, we were told that the time wasn't right. Then Taoiseach says, what we needed was maybe a subcommittee of the Good Friday Agreement. So we tabled a subcommittee of the Good Friday Agreement proposal to do this, and it was set up. But Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are blocking in terms of reference because they say the time is not right. But the reality is, the Good Friday Agreement, which we all subscribe to, sets out very clearly that under the principles of consent that Irish unity can happen, and the model for there is in relation to a border poll. And we see from different opinion polling, particularly in the context of a no-deal Brexit, that more and more people, and indeed in certain opinion polls, that the majority of people are saying in that context that they want to see Irish unity. We see it in relation to the South. I think the exit poll by RTE showed an overwhelming support for Irish unity. You know, I've seen a poll, it's an online poll that you don't pay too much attention to, but 45,000 people subscribed to a journal poll in relation to the question of a border poll in the context of a no-deal Brexit, and 85% of them said that they would want a border poll because they understand in the South the impact that Brexit can have in relation to our futures north and south, but they also have a support, a genuine support, in my view, for Irish unity. So yes, it's important to keep calm, but it's also important to realise that the momentum is there, that attitudes are changing, and they're not just within the nationalist and Republican community, but also those that would not identify traditionally as coming from that community, and therefore there is an onus and a responsibility on us to prepare. As part of that preparation, what I call it the conversation stopper is this idea that the South could never afford the North, and sure, the Northern economy is a basket case, and the subvention is £10 billion sterling, and that's it. End of conversation, and let's move on to other issues. And I've been interviewed by senior people in journalism, and the argument goes somewhere like this: sure, if we were to have Irish unity in the morning, we'd have to raise taxes on every man, woman and child in the South by €10,000. And the reality is none of that is true. There is no €10 billion that would be needed in the context of Irish unity to support the Northern economy. The subvention figures that are out there are mythical, they're not factual, and they've never been challenged in a robust way, in my view, by journalists in the way that I think they should. We in Sinn Féin have done a lot of work in relation to this here and engaged with the Office of National Statistics in Britain to actually dig deep into what all of this means. And so let me take you through just what the subvention is and what the myths are and what the facts are. The suggestion from unionists and indeed certain elements of the media is that there's a £10 billion sterling subvention. Where they get that figure is that they say that the block grant, or what is assigned, attributed an expenditure to the North is £26 billion sterling. On the other side of the ledger, the income, the tax that is generated in the North is €17 billion they estimate or they attribute. So when you deduct both figures, you come up with a €9 billion figure not the 10 billion, so you've made €1 billion saving straight away. But then when you look at each of those components, expenditure and income, you actually find that the figures aren't accurate. Not accurate in the way that they're being presented. So when we look at expenditure, when we look at what is being attributed by the Office of National Statistics in relation to expenditure in the North, it is broken into three components. The first component is total identifiable expenditure. Second component is non-identifiable expenditure. And the third component is expenditure outside of the UK. So if you look at total identifiable expenditure, this is money that is spent in the main by the executive in the North or by local councils. It's decisions that are taken by elected representatives here in this jurisdiction and spent on services and so on. But crucially, as part of that there is €3.4 billion. So out of this €20 billion that's spent by local bodies in the North, €3.4 billion is spent on pensions. And in the context of Irish unity, those pensions would still have to be paid by the British Treasury. Now, is that just spin from Sinn Féin? No, it's not. The reality is, my father, when he worked in Glasgow, he lives in Donegal and has lived in Donegal since 1980, up until his death a couple of years ago. He got the pension from the British Treasury. Because pensions work not on citizenship, but on residency. It works on your contributions in terms of insurance while you were living in a certain jurisdiction. When Scotland, in the debate in relation to Scotland's independence, it had to be clarified whether the pensions entitlements of Scottish residents would still be paid by the UK Treasury, and the UK Treasury had to clarify that those pensions would be paid because they're not based on citizenship, they're not based on residency, they're based on your contributions that you have made over a lifetime into the national insurance. So for a start, the €3.4 billion would not apply. If you look at the second category then, total non-identifiable expenditure, this is expenditure that isn't spent in the North. It's expenditure that is not locally decided in terms of where it is, but it's spent by the British Parliament, and a certain section of it is attributed to the North based on population. 85% of that money is made up of two categories. First category is the expenditure on the British Army, which makes up £1.1 billion sterling, and the second category is in relation to national debt, which makes up €1.3 billion. Now, just to give you an example, so the British government say that the contribution in terms of the North, in terms of British Army, is €1.1 billion. In the entire South, for all our wages of our peacekeeping personnel and our international peacekeeping operations, it amounts to €700 million. About nearly half what is being attributed to the North. So you can see very clearly in the context of Irish unity, we will not be spending an extra €1.5 billion on British or on Irish military activities, and therefore there's an automatic saving. The issue, as Paul mentioned, in terms of the €1.3 billion on debt, would be part of a negotiation, and it would have to be offset by all of the assets, because if you pay for some of the liabilities, then the argument is, well, we actually own some of the nuclear submarines, and we actually own X, Y, and Z, we own a bit of the House of Commons, and we own this and that, and we want our share of that if you're saying that we have a share of the debt. So that becomes a real political conversation and a negotiation in relation to that. And the third part of that is then the outside the EU, or outside the UK. This is about £700 million sterling that is attributed to spending in the North, never spent in the North, it's spent in other jurisdictions, other foreign territories of the British administration, different kind of ambassadors and residencies and overseas territories and all the rest. And because we have this jurisdiction makes up a certain population, some of it is attributed there. Again, this would not be applicable in the context of Irish unity. We would not, in the context of Irish unity, still be spending €700 million on British overseas territory. So you can see very clearly on one side of the ledger where they argue that there's £26 billion sterling spent in the North, and it's actually really not spent in the North. And in the context of Irish unity, €3.4 billion in pensions wouldn't be applicable, €1.1 billion in British Army wouldn't be applicable, serious questions in negotiation about €1.3 billion of debt, and €700 million in terms of overseas territories would not be applicable. You add all that up, it comes to about €7 billion. The second part of it then is they look at the other side of the ledger, which is the amount of taxes that are raised. in the north, and they estimate that that is about 17.3 billion euro, or pound sterling. Again, there's an underestimation here, and the underestimation is in the region of about £500 million sterling. The reason the underestimation is here is because many of the larger national and international companies, the likes of your Asda's and your Marks and Spencer's, and the corporation tax, your retail firms, your banks, the corporation tax that they pay, that is generated genuinely here in Belfast or in Derry or in other areas, it is not recorded in the north, because it is paid by their parent company in London, and therefore it is recorded as tax that is generated in London. But obviously in the context of Irish unity, it is genuine tax that is recorded and should be recorded in the island of Ireland. So that increases your revenue here in the north. So you can see very clearly that the €9 billion mythical figure is a lot less than what is being suggested, and I've outlined that. Then the other argument is this here, and the argument is that the economy is so bad, it's costing us so much money that we couldn't afford Irish unity. But it's the reverse that is actually the case. The northern economy, prior to partition, was the engine that drove the island of Ireland. Belfast was the heart of the economy in the island of Ireland. It was only as a result of partition that there has been a skewed away from Belfast and into Dublin. And there's obvious reasons for that. They are the economic levers that we should have here to decide policy which is in the interests of Irish industry, of Irish workers, of our local economy, of our domestic economy, are not here on the island of Ireland. And we have a policy that is suited towards London and the City of London, and therefore the spillover effects, which are negative in the main, because they're not suited to this jurisdiction, has resulted in a very sluggish economy here in the south. What we see from international evidence and the first modelling of Irish unity, which was done by Kurt Buchner, and this was peer reviewed by other economists of an international standing. They did a report in 2015 in the University of Vancouver, and they suggested over an 8-year period that the benefits of Irish reunification would bring €36 billion to the economy north and south. They looked at it subsequent as a result of Brexit and looked at the cost of non-reunification in the context of Brexit, and they said the only net economic benefit of all the scenarios they looked for is Irish reunification. And Irish reunification, in that context, in that report that came out in November 2018, meant that there would be an €18 billion stimulus to the northern economy and between €5 and €6 billion to the southern economy. Now, what does that mean when we talk of GDP figures and an increase in economic activity? With increase in economic activity comes jobs. With jobs comes increased taxes. With the increased taxes means that you reduce the deficit, you grow the economy, and so on and so forth. So whatever about the deficit, and the deficit a lot smaller than what is suggested, economic activity in the context of Irish unity will actually shrink that deficit, and indeed could actually deal with it in its entirety. But let me say this, even for those who still don't believe the international evidence, who don't believe the peer-reviewed economists, who don't believe people like David McWilliams who've looked at this and reported on this here, who don't believe in the fact that the information that we're putting out here today from the Office of National Statistics in Britain, and still argue that the North couldn't afford, or the South couldn't afford the North, even if the deficit was of that magnitude or less. And you know, we've heard some today say that we still couldn't afford it. That's not true. One of the jobs that I have to do as finance spokesperson for Sinn Féin is to prepare an alternative budget each year. One of the first things I have to look at is how much money is available in each and every year. In the South, the Department of Finance produced a 5-year projection, a baseline projection in relation to what is available to spend each year over the next 5 years. So what is available to spend over the next 5 years in the South? It's €20 billion. And I'll finish on this here. 6 billion of that is already pledged. It's already pledged because we'll have growing population, we need more nurses, we need more teachers in our schools for the more children that will attend and so on, and because of wage inflation and so on, that's already promised. But 14 billion of it is not pledged. 14 billion euro, which could easily accommodate the deficit in the north, even if you still didn't believe that the fortunes and the synergies of Irish unification would eat away at that deficit in the first place. So there's 2 points that I want to make very clear here today. One is the subvention figure of 10 billion is a complete and utter myth, and it needs to be busted, and the facts can bust that. The second thing is that we can afford the deficit of whatever magnitude it is because of the synergies of Irish unification and because of the strength at this point in time of the southern economy. And the third point is that Irish unity gives us the opportunity to reimagine and to reinvent our country, north and south, to deal with all of the inequities, all of the inequalities, and really deliver on a genuine republic that none of us, north or south, have lived in our lifetime.
Congratulations to everybody. We spent less than an hour doing that. That's good, and that should set the trend. I hope for what follows. Folks, we find very often at these events that we run every year that some of the best, some of the most stimulating ideas and conversation come after the talks. Now, that's not any reflection on the talks, but, and I'm hoping that today might be the same. But in order to do that with such a crowd, I'm going to ask for a little bit of discipline from everybody, which is be as snappy as you can, either in the contributions you make when I point you to ask a question or make a comment, and to the panel also, be as snappy as you can. And it may not be that every question needs to be answered by every person on the panel, okay? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and I can only count to 3, so I'm stopping at 3 each time. 2, 3.
50 plus 1, discuss please.
50 plus 1, discuss please. Who wants to take that? Martina?
It's the legal position. It's the legal position. It operates in every kind of election that you can think of, and it also appears to be the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. But personally, I would like it to be higher, because look at Brexit, 52, 48%, and Britain is absolutely riven with division. So learn from the past. We're fools if we don't, and those of us who believe in reunification should get out and make the argument so that when the vote happens, it's much more than 50 plus 1.
Paul, go ahead.
I think the parties aim unrealistically to persuade every single person, and that is the objective 100%. But, of course, the legal default is 50% plus 1, and that's simple.
Okay, that was a good start.
Good morning. Another excellent debate. Feile have organised that. We've come to Feile for 31 years. Now, the topic is all about economics and about a new Ireland or a United Ireland. And I'm wondering how the panel have a... At the minute, we're stuck with Brexit. We've got the unionists saying they don't want a United Ireland. I'm trying to keep this short and sweet and get it all in. But the DUP and the TUV, for example, can't even bid each other a time a day in our government here. So I'm old enough to remember standing on the Falls Road. I was 12 when I was standing with Grant Armstrong at the 50th anniversary of the Rising. And what I'm wondering is, in this new Ireland, if we ever get there, I don't believe I'll be allowed to see it, because we're having to drag unionists kicking and screaming to try and get a government up and on here. We've got a circus at Stormont, we've got a circus in Westminster, we've got a circus in America. So my question to the panel is, how do you convince me, a half-glass schoolman, that I'll ever see the United Ireland? Given the fact that the unionists here, they make it quite clear, it's not about economics, it's not about money, it's about the blessed union. They will never give up. I mean, and I'm not saying that all unionists are like that, but the DUP, the clue's in the name, it's Democratic Unionist Party, here's that, TUV, I know don't do anything up here, I can go on for a while. Well, see, that's what I come here for, because I mean, for 45 years in the case of my brother, I used this platform to speak his name, Paul Armstrong. And that's what Feile is about, giving Joe Bloggs who can't get on the Nolan show, doesn't want to get on the Nolan show. My main question to the four panelists is this United Ireland going to happen while I'm still above ground?
Okay. Did you hear Mr. Bloggs' question at the back? Everybody heard it? Go. Okay. Who's going?
Tricky question because I don't know how long you expect to be around for. But let me say this here because it's a very good question, and look, I passionately believe we are going to see a united Ireland. It is happening. It is the transition is happening. What is failing to happen is us failing to plan for it. Now, you mentioned about unionism. Well, of course, unionism, it's in their name, it's in their DNA. You know, they identify as British, and they will resist Irish unity, and that is their modus operandi, and that is fair enough. But you know as well as I know that this state here was created as a unionist-dominated state. But you'll also know that in the last 2 elections, unionism have lost their majority. And that is the best way of convincing you that things are changing, that the wind is changing, that there is change taking place. And you know, the question that we were asked earlier on about 50+1 is a reaction to the change that is happening. And I'm sure that unionism would not accept you know, a 60% margin for them remaining with Britain. So it's 50%. The change is about to happen. Our job is to prepare for that change and to make sure that unionism, as comfortable, and some of them will always resist it, but that the majority or the most people who identify as unionism recognise in this new Ireland that it is a place where their identity, where their cultures, where their rights are cherished and valued. And that's the job that we have to do over the next period of time.
Yeah, I just would like to add to that. I mean, I think that if you look at the situation, I think that the history is on the side of United Ireland. I mean, I think there is no doubt about that. And I think the Brexit thing has thrown a lot of things onto the agenda, as Martina has said. And, you know, when you look at the situation, you know, the demographic change is happening, the political change is happening, the loss of the majority for unionism is really key. And if you see, I think we're looking at a process of the breakup of Britain. You know, that's where I think things are going. And Northern Ireland and the unification of Ireland will be part of that process. And I think you will live to see it. I'm fairly convinced that I'm going to live to see it, so I would share it. But I would also like to think that in the negotiations about that new Ireland, about the form of United Ireland, 50+1 will apply also to gender and to women's involvement in shaping negotiations. Through a situation where we have a male-dominated and a kind of macho, Boris Johnson macho-style negotiating process, and we need to move away from that, and we can move away from it, and I think we'll get to an agreed new Ireland faster if it's gendered and inclusive. That's what I think.
Yeah. Society in Northern Ireland today is, in simple terms, divided into 3. So we have unionists, we have nationalists, we have the neutrals, the people who are neither one thing nor the other. And actually, I could be classified as that because I'm not Irish, I'm not nationalist, I believe in a united Ireland. So that's where I come from. And people I know, and I know well, who are born into unionist traditions and families believe in a united Ireland. Because things change. We actually, despite the fact that I say that we need to aim for 100% persuasion, we know that we're not going to get it. There are some unionists who are not going to be persuadable, but we don't actually, in practice, need every single unionist. What we need to do is to persuade all nationalists and Republicans that it's practical and we can deal with the health service concerns in particular. And we need to persuade the people in the centre, the people who maybe come here to work from Poland, people who come from other backgrounds, people who are atheists by background, that actually a united Ireland is the best way forward for them. And we need to have programmes and plans to do that, which is why I believe that actually Sinn Féin is wrong in saying repeatedly that the Irish government has to put forward a plan. Yes, the Irish government does have to, but I believe that every single political party that believes in a united Ireland has to put forward its own plans as well. And what we then do is we have an open conversation and discussion where we compare those plans and we work out how to bring things together. Because actually, to be successful, this has to be a movement that's led by civil society, not one that's seen to be owned by any particular single is the way that we persuade as many unionists as possible by it being led by a coalition of different civic groups, which brings together civic unionism, civic nationalism and civic neutrals to have that conversation. And what's really important is we stop simply saying we want it and we actually focus on how we achieve it.
Version of the answer, hang in there. Now, I've got one person that I promised, and I'm going to take 3 others, but before I take 3 others, I'm going to give priority to any hands of any women that go up. Anybody? No, you're not a woman. Okay. We got this guy up here, and then where was it? 1, 2 women. Okay.
Oh, okay, I don't want to encourage a dispute between Paul and Pearse, but this is hearts and minds, and there has to be integrity. And there's a dispute, a clear dispute on this subvention. And moving forward, that needs to be sorted in terms of the spirit of integrity, honesty, and because it is about outreach to those people who need to be brought into the camp. Now, that's one thing that needs to be sorted. But my concern is this. I don't want the end product in this, the transition, the last part of the journey, to be a Singapore model. Low tax, low regulation. It has to be a social democratic model where there's a private sphere and a public sphere. And my concern is that you recall some time ago, I believe, when European authorities or financial officials said to the Republic of Ireland, you need to go and get those billions back. Do you recall that? Okay, that is what I do not want to have politicians, political parties and governments not refusing to get tax from those people who are making a profit in this country. That's not the way ahead.
We need that as a comment. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh no, sorry, look at the door. Who was the woman who had her hand up? There was she? Yes, please.
I'm very like a girl, so but Pearse, what I'd like to say to you, I've never heard you speak before, so thoroughly enjoyed that. It's my first event at a FLAB for various reasons. You've convinced me. I think, I base my career on facts and figures and evidence, and you've got it. And I'd love to hear that inside of Westminster, though. I'd like you guys to be in there. I'm a media junkie. And we're sitting in a world where Trump won that election because he manipulated it. You guys don't have to manipulate it. Just get in there. That's what I would like, because the way that I live, the world that I live in, I pay attention to people inside. And this part of me tells me I would love to hear you stand up, or someone in Sinn Féin stand up and say it in there. Because I'm fed up hearing the same tired, repetitive rhetoric, which supposedly represents us in Northern Ireland. And it clearly doesn't. And it's fake, isn't it? So what you said to me today, and I'll hear it over and above everything else everybody else has said. Let's not go into the history of why you're not there. But I would like to think that the logic and the common sense should win the day. And everything you said to me today has convinced me that, it's not only vile, but it's a no-brainer. Like I said, I'd just like to hear somebody from Westminster saying that on my behalf rather than the usual from the DUP itself. That's it.
Well, I actually would love our 7 MPs to be able to stand up in the Dáil and actually say what I said. That's what this conversation, this journey is about. But let me say this. We've engaged with the Secretary of State. We've engaged with Theresa May, Boris Johnson just last week. We've seen what we're saying here to them. There is a need to prepare for a border vote. There is a need to start planning for this. There is a need in the context of Brexit. So there is no suggestion that the politicians who actually matter in some of these areas have heard Sinn Féin's voice. That's clear. But the issue here is about how do we actually move a dialogue with those who support Irish unity to start to plan and prepare. And it's not just the politicians. I agree with Paul. The Green Paper, like for people, a Green Paper is a discussion document which invites society and civic interest to contribute to a document. A White Paper is when the government take charge. What Sinn Féin are calling for is the government, along with the rest of us, to start that conversation with civic society in relation to preparation for Irish unity.
Sorry, forgive me.
I do feel very sympathetic to your position. I do think that we're in a very particular situation where within Westminster the Conservative Party is hugely vulnerable, and there is an opportunity maybe to derail the Brexit process. There are only a majority of one with Boris Johnson at the moment, and there's Sinn Féin has 7 MPs. I think I would like to feel that Sinn Féin at this moment in time is talking to its base and its supporters and putting the question as to whether, just for the Brexit votes, you could participate in Westminster, just around Brexit, not around anything else. Or like Fintan O'Toole is suggesting, having other people do that just on the Brexit vote, because there is a historic opportunity here, and I think it would be incredibly popular. It would create a popular momentum in favour of Sinn Féin, north and south of the border, if you did that. That's what I think.
Just in case you're not aware, Fintan O'Toole's suggestion that Sinn Féin MPs stand down cause by-elections, don't run themselves, so that the pro-Brexit parties like the Greens and Alliance would then go into Westminster to speak. If you think that's a great idea, if you think it's the most harebrained thing you've ever heard of, come on Monday and ask Fintan O'Toole himself. Tell him what you think, okay? No, sorry, but hold on, we've still got one.
Very encouraged that people are talking about preparing for a United Ireland, laying the groundwork for what it's going to look like, and what we want to see United Ireland look like. My concern is, following partition, we saw a very clear development of 2 very ultra-conservative states, with the North led by the UK, denying rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, rights for Irish language speakers, and in the South, an ultra-conservative state led by the Catholic Church, and at the moment we see Fine Gael and Féile, in charge in the South. Martin spoke about, giving the hand of friendship to the Unionists and maybe making promises of seats, and how do we ensure that we don't end up with another ultra-conservative state by joining 2 rock states together and having, a United Ireland led by Fine Gael and the DUP.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The 2 highly conservative states developed post-partition, and I'm very ashamed that of the republic that developed post 1916. I'm ashamed that it was a state which banned books, for example, and which gave such prominent, which really didn't separate church and state. But I think that is happening increasingly in the Republic, separation of church and state. And we know that because in recent referenda, the Catholic Church has advocated votes and the populace has not listened. So the Republic has changed enormously in a short space of time, since about the 1990s on, when you had divorce legalized, access to contraception became easier, and when same-sex marriage and abortion reform were introduced. So last year, for example, Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, introduced his partner to the Pope when he visited. That would have been unthinkable even a decade earlier. So I'd argue that what you have now in the Republic, while far from being perfect, and still a work in progress, is quite a modern state. It's slower in the north, definitely. And my hope is that by two parts of this island coming together, there would be more progress in the north. I don't see the DUP having the numbers to hold back progress. But can I say, first of all, that the DUP don't represent unionism. There is moderate unionism. You know, we can date that back to the United Irishmen and women. But as well as that, I welcome unionism in Dáil Éireann because the Irish state is still a little monocultural. It's changing, but it's still a bit on the monocultural side. It does need to speed up separation of church and state. And I think that a unionist voice in Dáil Éireann would be an advantage. One of the factors in the financial collapse was the lack of diverse voices. So I think it could be good for all. And to unionism, I would say that their voice in a reimagined Ireland would carry more clout than it does in Westminster generally, apart from these highly unusual circumstances.
Could I just add one short comment to that? Is that I think the process of social change has been very significant in the South over the last 10, 12 years or longer even. And there's been less of that in the North. But the economic structures are hugely shaped by the neoliberal economic model, both north and south of the border. So economic change has been absolutely marginal, and we're stuck into a low tax economy in the south, and a lack of public investment in social infrastructure of all kinds, and conservative policies which are so evident around housing, for example, where in housing the Fine Gael party is completely dictated by market-based economics as opposed to public investment. And those economic structures are slower to change, and we need more radical change at an economic level.
I'll respond by linking in with the previous question about the subvention, because as well as the issue of subvention, there's also the very important issue about whether we want a low tax model. And the simple answer in terms of the subvention is the 5 billion figure that I've used is based on the work that Tom Healy, who was with the Nevin Economic Research Institute, used, which as far as I've seen is the best analysis when you break it down. So Pearse and I just have to disagree over this, and I'm simply basing it around what the Nevin Institute did, which is a trade union-orientated think tank. And other people have done work, Richard Ramsey at Ulster Bank, but he won't tell me what outcome he found, so I just can't really help you with that. But I think it's very important. We can't guarantee what the future of a united Ireland will look like in terms of economics and social policy, because that's democracy. We have to fight for what we want, and we fight for it within a united Ireland rather than within the separate jurisdictions, and fight in terms of putting forward the political ideas. Personally, I regard myself as a socialist. I believe in a regulated market, and that, I hope, is where we move. But the truth is that while the Republic of Ireland adopted a much more European outlook than Northern Ireland or Great Britain did, that came with, yes, the positives of social liberalism, but it came with the negatives of economic liberalism. And we actually, I'm afraid, there is no shortcut, there's no guarantees. We have to argue, whether we're inside the European Union, outside the European Union, whether we're part of the UK, whether we're part of the United Ireland, we have to argue for our political ideas. We have to make the case, we have to say, that system doesn't work. And you know, there is this enormous failure of memory that 2008, the financial crash, the worst crash since the 1920s, was caused by the under-regulation of the financial system. And now we're being told, those of us who live in the north, that by Boris Johnson, that the future is with a lower regulated system, with a lower tax base. And that is not what I want. And actually, a lot of people in Northern Ireland, whatever their backgrounds, do not want that type of economic model, which is damaging to people. So the simple truth is that we have to argue our case. And to take Martina's other point, the other area that feels let down by the DUP, not just people who are socially liberal, not just people who are not identified, lots of loyalists. I've done lots of interviews for podcasts, a series of podcasts about asking influential figures about how they see the future of Ireland, North and South, about how they see the future of the border, about what they want in terms of creating a more positive society. And if there's one section of the population that is unhappy with the way things are in Northern Ireland, it's the political leadership of loyalism. Because loyalists feel badly let down by the DUP. And working class loyalist communities have a lot of common interests with the rest of us, and we have to build on those.
2 points. I think the point about getting the difference between myself and Paul correct isn't really a difference. I think you have to just understand that what's happening in relation to the debate about the subvention is it's very live. So there's a lot of different people, and that's very good. There are a lot of people trying to grapple with the idea and with the facts of it. Now, anybody who's looking into this all agree and argue that the subvention isn't the 10 billion figure. The issue here, and the Scots had the same issue with independence, is that the Treasury doesn't create a set of accounts uniquely for the North, so you have to dig really, really deep. So the information that we have now is the first time we've put this in the public domain here at Féile. But we are privately engaging with all of the other actors who are dealing with this, including the ESRI and all of the rest, providing them the detailed information that we have. And I have no doubt, as we've already had some of these private conversations, that they are now adjusting their view of what the deficit is or the subvention is as a result of this. So it's because it's live that there's different figures coming out that wasn't available maybe a couple of months ago when the Devlin Institute did their piece of analysis. In relation to the comment about the Conservative state, that analysis is there and that fear is there, and that's why I think that if you, and I agree with Paul's and others' views in relation to the economy here. I don't want a United Ireland that is just based on the 26 county marketplace economy. Absolutely not. I believe in a real republic. I think Irish unity in itself is going to force discussions in relation to questions about universality around health, about public services, because you have to integrate two different sectors, despite the fact that now you have Britain rolling back in more privatisation and less regulation and so on and so forth. But that is going to force an issue which the South has not been comfortable or has not dealt with in the past. The second thing to me is that if it is just that type of conversation, then we failed. We need to have a wider conversation about what underpins a new Ireland. What does the new constitution look like? What does the Bill of Rights look like? And the Bill of Rights isn't just about protecting British identity or traditions or symbols that are important to those that identify with Britain, but also what are the fundamental rights in a new Ireland? How do we really build a real republic for the first time? And that's the real opportunity. That's the exciting part about what is ahead of us. But that exciting part will only happen if we plan for it, if we start discussing now. Because if we don't plan for it, as I said, the train has left the station. It's going to arrive sometime, and when it arrives, then it's too late to have these type of preparations. And that's what's happened in Britain with Brexit. With no planning, they called a poll, and so on. So there's an onus in all of this. From as I said, my contribution. It's not just politicians; it's civic bodies. You look at the Common Look West Gael, and I'm heading to Mayo in a minute to Donegal and the Super 8. But if you look at their constitution still, it's about preparation in terms of Irish unity. There's a responsibility on GAA leaders to be discussing about how we prepare for Irish unity. There's a responsibility of community groups and organisations, of trade unions, of business groups, on all of us, because it is going to affect every section of society, but it also creates huge opportunities for all of those sections. So my message is get involved in the debate now.
This wonderfully weird image I suddenly had of Leo Varadkar introducing Ireland to the Pope. I'm going to take three more and see how far we get on the basis of that. One, the guy on the left. Two, because you got a question yesterday. No, on the left. And three.
It's a question for Pearse, but Ursula. It's a question for Pearse, but Ursula, you got to clap.
Could we hold a second?
Sure.
Some people want to leave. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. We can just let them get out so we can hear the question properly. Okay. Very good.
Yeah, Ursula, you got a clap there when you said you wanted Sinn Féin to go and take the seats in Westminster to derail Brexit. I mean, maybe I'm unpopular, but I completely disagree with that. British people voted for Brexit in a referendum, and I think it would be anti-democratic to do as you suggest. Now, Pearse, my question for you is, I'm a Republican. I'm pro-European, but I'm really suspicious of the EU. And I want to ask you a question about national sovereignty. If we unite Ireland and economic sovereignty, it seems to me that the EU institution lacks transparency, all sorts of democracy. And look what happened to Greece when Greece tried to pursue its own sovereign economic agenda. They're smashed and crushed. The RMT Union in Britain are highlighting the fact that Jeremy Corbyn says he wants to nationalise the railways in Britain, but under the rules of the EU neoliberal sort of agenda, he can't do that. How much sovereignty do you think we really have in the context of a European Union? I know that everybody wants to celebrate the European Union against the Brits because of Brexit. I'm pro-European, but I'm afraid and I'm scared of the EU limiting our sovereignty in a united Ireland.
Okay, I'm going to take the three in a row. Yes, yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, I'd like to say that in relation to the extensionism question, just very quickly, I think if you just look back just slightly over 100 years, what happened with the Irish Parliamentary Party, when it held the balance of power in Westminster, and they were going in and taking their seats, and the way in which Home Rule and Ireland's national question were frustrated then, that gives you the answer you need to know from history as to what would happen if Sinn Féin even did break the point of principle and go into Westminster. We have ample evidence that. Just read your history. But the thing I want to touch on is a couple of other quick points, if I may. Paul has quite correctly made the case of the economics of a united Ireland. That's a case that has not been made, and we need to get it out there. Pearse, you said two very telling things. You said that I've just got these figures, and these figures aren't really out in public domain. You're quite right, but those figures, and Paul, what you have said, and the engagement of civic society needs to happen. Those arguments are not out there, and they need to be out there. So that's the first point. You also said, Pearse, and I think it's a very telling thing, how do we get people in the south? I'm not talking just about the government does have a responsibility. The Irish government has a responsibility which it has failed and signally failed in. But how do we get the people in the south who have, after 100 years, a partition, I'm sorry to say this, very often what's seen as a partitionist mentality. And it's left to nationalists in the north to try and make a case for a united Ireland. How do we get the ordinary rank and file people in the south? And half my family come from the south, half from the north, so I'm your genuine all-Ireland product. I'm saying, how do we get those people to re-engage with a vision of a republic that doesn't exist yet? Yes, it's about economics. Yes, it's about rights. Yes, it's about cultural identity. Yes, it's about safeguards. But how do we engage people with the vision that people had over 100 years ago? A republic, and a republic that, as the proclamation set out a vision and a dream, and if you like, a list of things that the Irish people could expect. How do we do that with the people in the south? Because it seems to me there's a comfort zone that says, let's just sit back and see how the north sorts itself out. That's the impression that you get. So we know the people in England, well, it's popularly put out there, and people in England will get shot of us in the morning. And I think, to a large extent, that's probably true. But what about the elephant in the room? This is a nation, it's an Irish nation. What about the rest of the nation and the rest of the country? And that's where I think there's a job of work to be done.
Thank you. Brad, third one here.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the push for the border poll and Irish reunification seems to be driven from the north and from the change in the demographics. If Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, what's in it for Feile, Féile, Phobail, Pearse, for us?
back that Fra was saying that the push for a border patrol seems to be coming mainly from the north. And so the question is, what about Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, what's in it for them to support border patrol? Anybody want to start?
Just to answer the most recent point first, what's in it for Fine Gael? Let me tell you, I believe passionately that Leo Varadkar would love to be the first Irish Taoiseach of a 32-county Ireland. I can't think of any senior politician in the Republic who wouldn't see that as a feather in his or her cap. But they are nervous. They're nervous of antagonizing loyalism. But I do see movement on that front. It may not be very apparent to people here, but it is visible. The other thing is, there are conversations, just to go back to your point, sir, there are conversations happening in the Republic, you're just not aware of them, and your impression, forgive me, is wrong. I can give you 2 examples. I spoke at Doherty Book Festival in June on this very subject, and there were 4 times as many people at that event as are in this room. There was standing room only. It was at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon. I rolled my eyes when I saw it, the programme. I thought there'd be nobody there, a bit like Pearse when you arrived. I thought there'd be nobody there. It was and people paid to get in. So they put their money where their money was. And it was, there were a lot of business people there who were very interested in it. So the conversations are happening. I also said pretty much what I said here today at the Burren Law School. Maybe that was 2 months ago, tops. The Burren Law School is full of senior legal eagles and judges from all over Ireland. And I find people from the Republic very, very engaged and interested in the subject. So, take heart from that. The conversations are happening.
Could I just add a little bit to that? Because I agree with Martina that there is a lot of conversation in the Republic, and the ground is shifting all the time. And the debate, partly because of Brexit, the debate has become more urgent and more immediate for people. But the conversations are happening. But this thing I want to pick up about Europe, because there's been a failure of the whole project of a social Europe, and in some ways the financial crash brought that to a head, because it was all dictated by monetary policy, coordinated across the EU, and victims were Ireland and Greece and Spain and Portugal to a certain extent, and Italy. All the countries that were the periphery, and the centre was fighting for its own interests. So that means that we need to look, as Paul was saying earlier on, at civic society in Ireland in terms of the building up the momentum towards a radically new structure for United Ireland. But at the same time, we need to ally with other civic society across Europe. And I think particularly the periphery countries, because we have a lot of common interests with those. And I think we need to be making solidarity, a framework of solidarity around the European, the map of Europe. And I think we could find a lot of common interest there if we worked hard enough at it. Because I think there's a lot of support for Ireland at the moment in Europe, just even in terms of the Brexit issue. But I think there's a whole network of LGBT organisations, women's organisations, business community even, and political organisations, very different kinds, the island communities and border communities, all of those that share lots of interest with us. And we need to be thinking in those terms, in terms of the social Europe.
comments. I agree with Martina. There certainly is a conversation going on. I've been doing 1 or 2 events like this every month for the last year, and including at Mount Stewart, where it was a very unionist audience. Things are changing, and I also did Radio 4's Today programme a few days ago on Irish reunification and the economic case, and upset an enormous number of unions by referring to Northern Ireland as a failed state. As a result of which, I've decided to in future refer to it as a dysfunctional society, which no one seems to be able to argue against. In terms of what's in it for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, I think they are terrified of the short-term economic impact of reunification. So yeah, we have to do more figures, and we actually have to probably see how Brexit goes and see how things go in terms of the pressures on the Irish budget from digital tax measures with the OECD, and also about what happens with the United States Make America First program. So again, we shouldn't be greedy and try to do things too quickly, but we have a program, we have a plan. And in terms of how we bring about this plan, then I think we have to create a broad civic movement. And I've been speaking with people about this. The Waterfront Hall, where I was happy to be one of the speakers, was a major part of that. There's been conversations within civic unionism, and we have to create a broader network of civic organisations that discuss these things. Doesn't mean that we're saying to civic unionism, you have to believe in this, but we have to have this conversation about what is the future of this place, which actually is failing, dysfunctional, and actually I bring my kids up in a society that is still segregated, which is morally indefensible. So we have to look to the future and how we plan. And if there is one positive about where Fianna Fáil are going, I mean, I interviewed a Fine Gael politician recently who said absolutely it's his ambition to create Irish unification, and Fianna Fáil indicated to the Irish Times a few days ago that they have a programme for reunification, which is very similar to what I've been arguing, which is the idea of gradually losing the subvention, so you transition from where we are to where we go. So things are changing, and that conversation is taking place.
Just on a couple of the points, I agree with the speaker in relation to the lack of transparency, the sovereignty issue, but every bit of sovereignty that we've given away in the South, it was ourselves in referendum, unfortunately, that gave it away. So there is major issues and there are major reforms that need to take place at a European level, that needs to be more people-centred, that needs to be far more transparent, that needs to be less market-dominated, and we can see some of the stuff in terms of Mercosur and all the rest that why people are reacting against the European Union, despite a lot of popular support at this point in time because of Brexit. But I think it would be folly in all of us to actually misread Brexit. Like, we know what the main agenda and motivation was behind Brexit, but there was also an issue for a large number of voters in relation to the direction of Europe as well. And just to brush it off as all British jingoism would be wrong. We need to look ourselves and see what's gone wrong in terms of Europe. In terms of the conversation, I mentioned in my opening remarks that it's a lot more muted than is taking place here in the north. It is happening. It's happening in academic circles. It's happening in media circles. It's happening in opinion pieces in the papers. But it's not happening in the same way that it's happening in the north, where it's it's part of kind of nearly daily conversation. And there has to be. There's a tipping point in all of that. And in my view, the government really needs to lead out on that. That's where the government needs to instigate a national discussion, a discussion, and I mean a truly national discussion, all-Ireland discussion in relation to what does this mean. Will turkeys vote for Christmas? I don't read it like that, but would Leo Varadkar have made the comments that he made last week, 3 months ago? Not a chance. Would not make those comments. His comments in relation to that a no-deal Brexit will force people to question the union, and we need to be prepared for that. Sinn Féin have been saying that for a number of years, and we've been criticised for saying it by Leo Varadkar and others. The reality is, so why did Leo Varadkar say it? He's an expert at reading public opinion. Now, I give you just 2 wee snippets of a journal poll. One of them was in the context of Mary Lou McDonald talking about the need to prepare for Irish unity, and the conversation she had with Theresa May. And as I said, 85% said, yes, we need a border poll in the context of no-deal Brexit. The other one was in reaction to a piece by Fianna Fáil saying that we would be toxic, incendiary, and so on and so forth, and this is not what we need now. And that was just done last week, and there was about 12,000 or 15,000 people that responded to that, and 67 says we need a border poll. Now Leo Varadkar reads that, and that's why he's making the comments that he's making, because they will go with where public opinion is at this point in time. For Feile, it's different. Feile grassroots believe in an Irish unity. Neil Martin, unfortunately, is blinded by Sinn Féin, and he is taking strategic decisions that are counterproductive to the national interest. It's not just in the context of Irish unity, more damaging his comments and his analysis in relation to the peace process. They're completely off the wall. They don't have any basis in reality in relation to his analysis that Martin McGuinness deliberately, collapsed the institutions for personal political reasons and so on and so forth. It's absolutely, nonsense, but he's blinded by Sinn Féin, and therefore it's the same issue in terms of Irish unity is his concern around Sinn Féin. So what senior Fianna Fáilers have said to Paul is what he said in response to the conversation that myself and Jerry Adams had with him 2 years ago, that they were going to prepare a paper on Irish unity within 3 months. Didn't do it. 12 years ago they said they were going to stand in elections in the north and so on and so forth. Now, political parties will do what political parties will do, but those who are not convinced ideologically to move in that direction for whatever reasons will also respond to public opinion. And therefore, if there is a bigger discussion, and including the input from civic nationalism and those who don't identify as unionism in relation to injecting themselves into the debate in the South, that is very strong, and we've seen the impact that had, particularly in relation to the Brexit discussions. Like when Sinn Féin framed the idea of special status for the North, and we proposed that motion at all, we were told that it was never reckless, all the rest. Civic nationalism got behind it, argued that we needed an all-Ireland discussion and all that. It is now the position of the state. It is now the position of the European Union outside of Britain. So there is a lot that we can do together at political level, but also at civic level to actually instigate that debate. I do believe personally myself that because of opinion and because of, even though the muted conversation is happening, that there will be something that is going to change that within a very short period of time. I don't think that they can hold back this debate any longer. And I think if we're back here at this time next year, we will probably have seen the establishment of forums that will have the discussion of Irish unity at a national level being discussed with a civic dialogue. And I'm convinced that that will happen because, as I said, the train's left the station.
Last round of questions. Everybody snappy as possible. People have other places to go to. And I'm going to take a guy in the grey t-shirt at the back. 1, 2, 3. In that order.
I just like to ask kind of what they think about the
Okay, another second, please. Your pride's one o'clock. You're right. Sorry. Okay. Snappy for pride goers, etc.
I just like to ask kind of what they think about the idea of the strength of the status quo, because all cards are stacked in favour of the existing system, which is Northern Ireland, part of the UK. So, for example, it's up to the Secretary of State to actually allow us to even have a border poll so they can determine when that happens. We know that, for example, BBC Media tends to stop the border. We know that, for example, the education system, the legal system, so on, are all set up with this existing structure in place. We've had it for 100 years. It's very difficult for people to see beyond where that might be in terms of, for example, what the social welfare can be, what the healthcare system might be. And there's a huge amount of misunderstanding about what could happen, a lot of fear that plays in. I'm from Dublin, I live in Belfast, and I know that people need to start addressing those issues now and start to plan. But it's just that idea that potentially will be very difficult to convince the middle ground that they can move beyond their existing living standards.
So the inertia of the status quo.
Status quo.
Okay. And the second person was here.
Obviously, we've been discussing economic aspects of possible reunification. But in the forthcoming months of the process of persuasion and so on, and I'm not just talking about the view of what's just been said here and the top table, not only are we seeking to persuade unions, but also people who have a partitionist mindset in the South. My question is this: will it be legitimate for nationalists to say to their unionist neighbours, particularly unionists from younger unionists from a unionist family background, this is your chance to rectify to reverse a great moral wrong which was inflicted on this country. It was called partition. It was foisted upon us at the point of the German bayonet, mounted on a German gun, backed up by English Army generals in the car. This is your chance to rectify a great moral wrong.
Okay.
It's a great discussion. My three biggies will be coming from the side. My three biggies questions to the panel come from the side. Very specifically, I'd say to you, Pearse, right? Would be from my family and as an ordinary working person down south, my biggest difficulty would be the enormous health costs we have. Because if you live down south, even though you pay a health insurance, if I get sick, I have to go to my doctor, pay €55, then I have to pay then for the prescription. So we don't have an NHS system. You do if you're unemployed and you have a medical card. It's almost identical, I think, in that case. Anyway, I've lived in England, never have to worry about insurance when I worked in England, or in any other European country. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and Pearse, you're an expert on this because well done to you on that interview, I saw it, and the grilling you gave the insurance companies. That's another huge expense for me and my family. The cost of insurance for driving a vehicle in the south is outrageous, absolutely outrageous in comparison to any other European country. And good man yourself for Pearse for tackling it, but it hasn't changed it. I'm still paying a massive insurance cost. Public liability comes into that as well. That's going to put half the country out of business. Is that what they're aiming for? To crash the economy? Anyway, and the third thing is that the housing situation. So basically, as an ordinary person down south, I feel really powerless around these things. That's the conversation going on. That how do you align this with the unity? If we can put billions for a broadband, me as a taxpayer, and for the most expensive hospital in the world, isn't that the truth? The new children's hospital is going to be now the most expensive hospital ever built. My taxpayers, but yet I'm paying for an enormous price for just being, if I get sick, I can't get sick. I think I have to weigh it up, you know, and then running my car, and that's ordinary people. I'm not on an expense account. I'm not on a TD salary or an MEP's expense account. I'm not on any of them things. I'm just an ordinary worker, and that is where the conversation has to be geared, you know, as and particularly around, like the lady said, the women, the gender thing. There's an awful lot of women, including myself, for very personal reasons, have to work part-time. And so I'm really hammered, as is, now, how do you line that with an argument around, because I tell you one thing, say around the subvention point you made, very good point, because as you say, we can afford this, that and the other. Well, please, if we can afford that price of a hospital and that price of a broadband, we can definitely afford 6 counties.
What is it about saving best for last? Any quick comments?
I would just like to completely agree with all the things that you were talking about in terms of the southern economy. The housing situation is just a complete crisis. The health situation is the same. The only thing would be if you're looking at the public sector and the different infrastructure, the welfare system is probably better. In terms of pension levels and employment rates for job seekers and all those kind of things. So that's probably better. So maybe we could look at taking the best of the Irish, both north and south of the border, and looking at health and housing. You're definitely right. You need to be, you know, and Paul talked about earlier on about the productivity was high in the south, and that incomes are higher. And that's all true. But the cost of living is a real issue, particularly for low and middle income earners in Ireland. And it is about health, it is about insurance, and it is about the cost of housing, particularly the cost of housing for young people, which has just excluded so many young people from having any kind of security in terms of housing. So those are the discussions that we need to absolutely have, because we need to be looking at a radical economic and social change in the context of a new Ireland. And we need to be pulling the best of our systems into a framework that we can all live with in the best possible way.
I agree with that. In terms of the concern we have about people opting for the status quo, well, actually, let's not be too worried about that. You look at Brexit and the fact that people did not opt for the status quo. Without anything clear to go for, they went for it anyway. And that shows that if people are unhappy with the status quo, they will jump towards something that is different. And actually, the status quo in Northern Ireland is definitely not working. So I think we can be positive. And what we do, though, there is one thing more than anything else that has to be dealt with if we want to be realistic about achieving a united Ireland, and that is to create a united working health service. Because I can tell you from the research I've done that people will not go for Irish reunification unless they are offered an all-Ireland integrated, free at point of delivery health service. That is an absolutely central point. And actually, that should be something every party in the South is arguing for in terms of Southern policy anyway. And the Sláinte care is going too slowly, the parties are not genuinely committed to it, and that has to be dealt with. Because, just to finish on this point, basically we need a country, a united country that works for everyone. And that means that we need a reformed Ireland. And it's the best of both, and it means we need a housing policy that works, we need an economic policy that works for all, we need a commitment to a social market within the European Union, and we need to end the partition that's damaged everyone. But basically, we need a reformed all-Ireland society. Thank you.
Just on your point about making the argument on doing an historic wrong, I'm from home, I've lived in Dublin since 1995, and I very quickly learned to stop saying a wrong was done to the 6 counties of this island, because people are very uncomfortable about that. They know that the North was left behind. Leo Varadkar had said, never again will the nationalist people be left behind. They feel they can't do anything about that. So, look, keep the goal in mind. There's no point in waving a big stick or being perceived to whine at people. The way to achieve results is to make the argument that together we're stronger, to put forward the very solid economic arguments you've heard today, that a united Ireland would have a larger domestic economy, there'd be extra jobs from a common corporate tax rate and from a common currency, that it's better for everyone. More money equals choices about how to spend that money to help those who are struggling. The argument can be made about a tourism boost, about a cultural boost with reunification, about a research boost for the universities cooperating, and let's not forget the boost with economic investment in the borderlands, which have struggled enormously. These are the arguments to make. Now, scratch the surface, and lots of people in the Republic do feel that the loss of the North was an amputation. Even people that you might not think it do feel that way. It's an emotional response. But endgame will be achieved by logic, by detail, by facts.
I would like to agree completely with that, and while some people may hold the argument that that's the argument, it's not going to be the argument that's going to convince unionism to support Irish unity. I had a phone call recently from a constituent of mine in Donegal. He's an Orange man, and he was asking me, he says, Pearse, in the context of Irish unity, will we still be allowed to march in Donegal? I know about that, but that was his genuine concern. You know, and my response to him is, see that flag? There's not a thread more green than there is orange. You know, so I don't see why that your tradition, Irish tradition, wouldn't be allowed to be and wouldn't be incorporated, of course. forced to bail out too much. But there are concerns, but there also shows that there's also discussions in probably unlikely quarters in relation to what Irish unity means. And I think that we have to come at the arguments, and people will come at the arguments from different perspectives. Some will want an All-Ireland soccer team, because that's their passion, that's their interest. They don't give a damn about economics, they don't give a damn about flags or marches or whatever, but they want an All-Ireland team to win the World Cup or get to the final or whatever. Some will come at it because they're farmers and they're going to lose the single farm payments in the context of Brexit. Some will come at it from business because they know that being access to a European market will benefit their business, and the borders hampering them, and currency fluctuations are just maybe killing off a business in border accounts. Some of them will come at it from an idealistic point of view and different. So the reasons and the arguments have to be multiple, and they have to be varied, and they have to be honest, and they have to be genuine. And we can't sugarcoat it because it's not a case, and I think the point that was made there is that there are huge issues and huge inequalities in terms of the South. It was pointed out very clearly the inequalities that exist in the South. And we need to, this is a chance to overcome a lot of them. And the status quo point, there's going to be huge reaction, north and south. It's not just from unionism in terms of Irish unity, because Irish unity and New Ireland allows for a real republic. So all those conservatives, all those who want the status quo, who the status quo suits them, whether that is in the insurance industry or whether that is in high business or people in a position of power, will react against the type of change that I think citizens want to bring about. Whether that's the right to housing, which will maybe disrupt developers and property speculators, having that in your constitution and so on. So, there'll be a lot of obstacles, there'll be a lot of challenges, and how I agree with the speakers in terms that it is about an opportunity to pick the best. A nationalist health service, a service that's fit for purpose, a service that everybody now in the South agrees with, that we need a single tier. We spend more per head of population in the South on health than is spent in the North per head of population. But yet, we have a terrible health system. It's absolutely dysfunctional because it's two-tier. We spend it on private on one hand, we spend it on public on the other hand. We're building the biggest children's hospital, the most costly children's hospital in the world. And in the middle of that children's hospital, as part of it, we're building a private hospital inside. So there's huge challenges, but I think the discussion in terms of Irish unity will also flood out some of those and will force us to have uncomfortable conversations. I also think that in the next number of months, there's a big opportunity for nationalists here to have their voice raised, and as a result, hopefully, of the referendum on voting rights for Irish citizens across the island of Ireland and abroad, that will also be a trigger point for some of the political parties, because they now have skin in the game, where their party candidates will have, the nationals here and will have votes, and I think it will be a big step change in relation to that referendum and winning that referendum. So I think we have to have real honest conversations. I think everybody has to be included. Maybe not everybody will participate at the start, but there's conversations that are happening in very unlikely quarters in relation to all of this. And sometimes change takes a long time to come about, but then that there's a tipping point, and within a blink of an eye, the change happens. I think that we're standing on that threshold here now. I think that that's the point that we're at. I think that we're about to enter into a very exciting time, and I think it's full of opportunities to reimagine, to recreate Ireland in a real democratic, social-centred republic that delivers for all of us and respects each and every one of our traditions, our allegiances, our alliances, and it's up to all of us to take ownership of this, and all of us to try and push this forward and make sure that we don't miss the moment that we're living in at this point in time.
Pearse spoke a bit in the future tense there, but in fact, that's what we were doing today. We were having that conversation. You were in that conversation, as you have been in other conversations in Féile, and you will be in other conversations in Féile. Ladies and gentlemen, that was brilliant. I'm glad I was here. I hope you were glad you were here. There are 50 or so discussions and debates next week that you can come to, so brace yourself and be there. But in the meantime, would you put your hands together one more time for